This is episode
Hello,
1126.
CFO Holly Gray is with us. Holly was
Sometimes you do
appointed
have to slow
CFO
down to
of
speed up.
Horizon3.ai
And what I mean by that is
earlier this
building
summer.
out the team,
She brings
building
over
out system
30 years of
integration,
financial
building out
leadership,
data definitions.
having guided high-growth
if I ask
cybersecurity
3 different
firms through
people,
IPOs, acquisitions,
kind of
and
what's
strategic scale.
what are you
Holly,
seeing for this
welcome.
number? And I get 3 different
Jack, it's great
answers.
to be
That's
here.
a
Thank
red
you for
flag
having
for
me.
me.
Holly, we see
and
your
so
path
getting
also
an organization
all the way
to
back to Arthur
strategically
Andersen,
slow down
where
a little
many
bit so that you
a
can
future
build out
CFO
that
found their
solid
footing.
foundation.
So
then
this is where we get to
allow
ask
the
you, go back in time
organization
for us.
to run as
And as
fast
always,
as you
we're
can
interested in those
to keep up with the
experiences you
pace
feel
of the organization
propelled
as
you
it grows
forward.
on a
What
scalable
comes to mind?
basis. Kind of keeping up
Sure.
with
No, I mean, I'll go back to the beginning. In my view,
I have to
a
give
recipe
a
for
shout out
success.
to remember a college professor back when I was at Boston College, and she asked me, what's your goal
When we talk
you
about scale today,
graduate?
the conversation
and my goal was
is
to have
no
a
longer
job.
about
I was paying my
adding
way
people.
through college, so
It's
I
about
knew
adding
I needed a way to pay off
intelligence.
those all those loans I was incurring.
Horizon3.ai sits at the
And she
center
was very
of
savvy to
two
say,
powerful
you should look
forces:
into accounting.
cybersecurity
There's so much
urgency
opportunity
and AI-driven
in what was then the Big
transformation.
Six. I'm dating myself a
Holly
little
Gray,
bit.
its
And
new
she was
CFO,
right, because by
has
Thanksgiving
built
of my
a
senior year, I
career
think I
in
had offers
high-growth
from
firms
5
where
of the 6
chaos
firms,
meets
and
discipline.
Arthur
And she
Andersen
tells us why
spoke to me.
slowing down
I was lucky
can
enough to
sometimes
be
the
in a
fastest path
small
forward.
subset of
In
commercial
this
audit,
episode,
so I started
Holly
my career
shares
in
how
the Boston
finance leaders
office
can
of
cut through
Arthur Andersen.
noise,
I'm originally
sharpen
from the Boston
priorities,
area.
and build
And
trust
it was great
across
because it
the
was an
team.
80-person
Our talk with
group, so you
CFO
were
Holly
kind
Gray
of lost in
begins
the
after this.
masses of
Hello,
commercial
CFO Holly
audit.
Gray is with us.
We
Holly
focused on
was
high
appointed
technology
CFO
companies.
of Horizon3.ai
Not as much as
earlier this
maybe
summer.
Silicon
She
Valley,
brings
but
over
Boston
30
has
years
a
of financial
technology
leadership,
belt, and
having
so
guided
worked on
high-growth
companies in that
cybersecurity firms
area.
through IPOs,
I was lucky enough to be
acquisitions,
promoted to
and
manager a
strategic
year
scale.
early, but you
Holly,
only buck the
welcome.
trend so much in
Jack,
public
it's great to be
accounting,
here.
and
Thank you for
so
having me.
I got
Holly,
that,
we see your
that
path
preview of
also
what was going to
leads
be probably
all the way
next,
back to Arthur
let's call it
Andersen,
6 to 8
where
years of
many
my career,
a
and
future
decided
CFO found their
I really
footing.
like more of the consultative approach
this is where we get to
versus
ask you,
kind
go
of
back
when
in
you get
time
into
for us.
manager and then
And as
swerving
always, we're
towards that
interested
partner
in those
track
experiences you
becomes a
feel
little bit more sales
propelled you
oriented.
forward.
And
What comes to mind?
I was very opportunistic.
Sure. No, I mean, I will go back to the
something that
beginning.
is important,
And I have to give
aspiring CFOs or CFOs to do in their career. And what I mean by that,
and she asked me,
there was somebody who I had previously worked with, who was a couple of years ahead of me at Arthur Andersen. He had gone to a company as their controller,
I needed a way to pay off
and had been
those,
promoted
all
to
those loans I
CFO.
was
And
incurring.
so I reached out to him and
she was
said,
very savvy.
congratulations on your
You should look
promotion.
into accounting.
I'm going to get you looking at
so much
your role, and I'm
opportunity
interested.
in what was
And
then
I
the
picked
Big
that
Six. I'm
company
dating
because
myself a little bit.
This was around the
And she was
2000
right, because
time
by
frame when we
Thanksgiving of my
had
senior year,
the
I think I had
dot-com
offers
bubble
from
bursting, and
5
I
of the
was
6 firms,
I was strategic
Arthur
in terms
Andersen
of
spoke to
I
me
wanted to
to
join a company
I was
that
lucky enough
was going
to
to be able to
be in
weather
a small
that
subset
economic
of
downturn.
commercial audit.
The company
So
I
I started my
the company
career in
I
the
was
Boston
trying to go
office
after
of Arthur Andersen,
they had
from the Boston
remember
area.
off the top of my head,
And it was great
95
because it was an
million cash.
80-person
It was a public
group,
company.
so you work kind of
300
lost in
people,
the
international
masses
operations, and I looked at that and
of
said,
commercial
this would
audit.
be a really good,
focused on high technology
stable,
companies.
first industry position
not
for
as
me,
much
where
as
I now need
Silicon
to,
Valley, but
in
Boston
auditing, I
has a
argue
technology
you're
belt,
horizontally
and so I
wide.
worked on
I now
companies
needed
in
to
that
get vertically
area.
deep on
Was
being
lucky enough
in
to be
industry,
promoted to manager
and
a
I
year
thought that
early,
that
but
opportunity
you only bucked the trend
would
so
provide
much
for
in
that.
public
I was
accounting,
looking at a
and
2 to
so
3 year time
I
frame. I
got
wanted to know I
that
had
preview
stability
of what
for
was
2
going
to
to
3
be
years of
probably
that
the next,
company
let's
to
call it 6
learn
to 8
and
years
grow.
of my career, and
And
decided
2 to 3 years
I really
became
like more of the
8 'cause
consultative approach.
we went through
versus
a
kind of
reverse
when you get into
into a
manager
merger and went through a
towards that
massive
part of the
amount
track.
of
It
M&A.
becomes a little bit more sales
When I
oriented.
ultimately departed that company, it
And I
exceeded
was-
my
I was very
expectations to where we had eclipsed
and I think
over
that's something
600
that
million
was
of revenue, and I was
for
responsible for a team
CFOs or
of
CFOs
just
to
about
do in
100
their career.
professionals
What I mean
rolling
by
up
that
underneath me.
is
I
there
do
was
want to ask
somebody
you
who
something
I had
here
previously
because,
worked
and
with,
again,
who
you
was a
just
couple
went
years
through
ahead
about
of me at Arthur
13
Andersen.
years of
He had
your
gone to
career
a company
already by
as
the
their
time you're leaving
controller,
Aspect.
and had been promoted to
what
CFO.
what,
And so
I thought
I
was
reached out to
interesting,
him and said,
you invested 5 years
congratulations on
at
your
Arthur
promotion.
Andersen, and
I'm
you
going to get you
leap
looking
in
to backfill your
2000,
role,
which,
and I'm
as you
interested.
say, that was that
And I
critical
picked
year.
that
That's when
company
the
because this
dot-com
was
implosion
this
is
was around
actually
the
happening.
2000 time
But
frame
frame when
prior
we
to
had
that,
the
you
dot-com
could have
bubble
gone to
bursting, and
dot-com.
I was,
In fact,
I
just
was,
last
I was
episode, we had a
strategic in terms
CFO
of
who did,
I
and
wanted to
he
join a
learned the hard
company
way.
that was going to be able to weather
you were
that
offered
economic
stock
downturn.
options.
The company
I'm
I
sure there were
chose,
some
the company
attractive
I was
options
trying to
back
go
in
after,
98,
they had,
99, when all
remember
the
off the top of my
craziness
head,
was going on, but
95
not you.
million
You're staying
cash. It
put.
was a public company. 300 people, international operations. And I looked at that and said, this would be a really good, stable first industry position for me where I now need to, in auditing, I'd argue you're horizontally wide. I now needed to get vertically deep on being in industry. And I thought that that opportunity would provide for that. I was looking at a 2 to 3 year time frame. I wanted to know I had stability for 2 to 3 years at that company to learn and grow. And 2 to 3 years became 8 because we went through a reverse triangular merger and went through a massive amount of M&A. And when I ultimately departed that company, it exceeded my expectations to where, we had eclipsed over 600 million of revenue, and I was responsible for a team of just about 100 professionals rolling up underneath me.
I do want to ask you something here because, and again, you just went through about 13 years of your career already by the time you're leaving Aspect. And
yes.
What I thought was interesting, you invested 5 years at Arthur Andersen, and you leap in 2000, which, as you say, that was that critical year. That's when the dot-com implosion is actually happening. But prior to that, you could have gone to .com. In fact, just last episode, we had a CFO who did, and he learned the hard way. But you were offered stock options. I'm sure there were some attractive options back in 98, 90, when all the craziness was going on, but not you. You're staying put. No, you're going to wait till you get dealt a stronger hand or something CFOs like to tell us, a less risk-adverse hand. What would you tell you about your thinking?
No, you're spot on, Jack. I mean, I definitely, having worked in that high technology division of Arthur Andersen, I absolutely did have clients of mine who were, who had .com in their name, talking to me about, hey, you'd be a great addition to the team. And for myself, I knew I was more focused on that first step out of Arthur Andersen being, I viewed it as a foundational step. I wanted to have a solid foundation that I could then build the rest of my career off of. And I looked at some of those .com companies and I wasn't convinced they'd survive for the next 12, 18, who knows how many months. And so you're right. It was a decision I made to just kind of pass on those, to say, maybe I can be a little less risk averse later in my career. I wasn't prepared to take that much risk on that early in my career, because my view was that first step out of public accounting was just so foundational for me and what was going to be the springboard for the rest of my career.
This company you step into, and again, Aspect Software is the name of it. Tell us something about that weight class of company, because here's something you do there over that 7.5 year period or whatever it might be. It grows. This company grows, and that's something you've experienced time and again in the other roles you move on to. So it's almost like a very familiar weight class and growth spurt of a company. Am I right about that? Or, that's sort of a signature of your career years, I think.
Yeah, I would say with the benefit of hindsight, yes. Certainly, if you had told me when I joined Aspect in 2000 that fast forward 8 years, we would take the company's revenues from, I think we were around 100 million when I joined. Don't hold me exactly to that, but I know we eclipsed over 600 million, and being responsible for a team of 100 individuals, never in a million years would I have forecasted that kind of growth. And candidly, I think for a lot of, at least for me and a lot of my peers who I speak to, that first jump from public accounting to industry is very difficult. I did not appreciate the profile of individuals that public accounting goes after, because they definitely have that candidate profile. And so you're sitting in an office with, like a bunch of mini yous kind of when you look around the table, versus when I came into industry and, just being responsible for, I think initially was 20 to 25 people. And I'm, mid to late 20s in charge of this entire organization. And there was a cultural challenge for me in terms of all of a sudden I'm managing a very diverse group of people who are, balancing family, kind of people who are like, I'm really happy with this role and I'm a ninja at this role, but I don't have career aspirations. And then conversely, they're all looking at me saying, you don't have a gray hair and you're still wet behind the ears. How are you going to lead us? So, I think kind of for me, that really helped form the manager and leader that I am today. And that's where I think having that stability, I mean, if there are younger individuals in their career who are listening to this podcast today, don't go for the home run for that first role. Kind of, I'm a sports junkie, and so as I like to say, people, a bunt single gets you onto first base, and you can, if you navigate your way around, you can still score a run. Versus, swing for the fences 8 times out of 10, you're gonna strike out. So just be mindful of that as you start to plot your career path.
When you come in, you get involved in some of these strategic acquisitions, or how do you grow as you move up in that company?
Yeah, no. So what I liked about Aspect is while I was the controller, I was still responsible for all aspects. So, kind of at that time frame in my career, I was still responsible for accounting and FP&A, which I think for me, that was something that I have continually sought out in each role I've done, because I think there's such a close partnership between those two functions. I really enjoy being responsible for both. And so we were about, I think, 3 or so years in at Aspect when we started to do a lot of the M&A, and absolutely, I remember my hair just being on fire at times where, we'd be integrating one acquisition and I'd already be doing diligence on another. And there were some harrowing times. And for me, what became crystal clear to me during that chaos in my career was I have to have a solid team. And I went out and I actually remember hiring, one of the best hires I did was an individual who, when I was at Andersen, she was a client of mine. She was the controller and then the interim CFO for a small public company. And I reached out to her to bring her on, a strategic senior role underneath me. And we joked and talked a little bit about that, kind of little role reversal that now, you'd be under me versus I was serving you as kind of, a senior auditor at Andersen. But I think for me, having that confidence that I could hire people who arguably might be better than me, and knowing that would be better for the team, better for the company, but also knowing I could make that work personality-wise, professionally with those individuals, was very advantageous for how we moved forward. And I did that in three of the roles that, were underneath me, and it worked out really well, because if you do not have that solid team underneath you, when you're running 100 miles an hour, it's very easy for that train to get derailed, that you have to lean on strong people underneath you if you don't have them.
What else are you learning at that time? You're building this strong team. You realize you need strong people around you when you're beginning to take on some of these integration challenges and some of the due diligence required during M&A. Is there a framework though that you've begun to style for yourself and the CFO? Were you architecting, like, here's how these things need to be done? Those early learnings that you might have had.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the early learn. I mean, I think we had to learn how to divide and conquer. It was impossible for multiple of us to be involved. So I would take a lead on a lot of the operational diligence, whereas my boss, the CFO, would be basically doing all of what I would call kind of the investment and deal diligence. But then because we had multiple transactions in flight at different times, then me basically saying to my team underneath you, I'm going to give you, kind of free reign on all of the integration, because it's impossible for all of us to be everywhere at once. And so again, it's having that confidence that you've got the right team to be able to then say, if it's a 10-step process, this individual has 1 to 3, this individual has 4 to 7, and this team runs with 7 to 10. That absolutely was a framework that we built out, pretty quickly. Once you have 2 transactions going at the same time, you quickly realize that delineation of responsibilities needs to be defined. And then to your point, Jack, handled on a repeated basis so that everybody kind of you work out some of those kinks as you go through things so that you just become even more of a ninja by the time you're working through the 4th, 5th, and 6th transaction. And candidly, that's some of those learnings I've carried forward into follow-on companies as we've gone through M&A as well.
What is it, what did you have to get exposed to next? What was some of the last boxes maybe that you checked off? And sometimes it's investor relations for many CFOs. I don't know if that's your case. What would you tell us?
Yeah, I think when it's funny because I can remember the day I was sitting in my office at Aspect Software, and we had gotten through all of the, all of the M&A was done. We had integrated everything. I remember sitting in my office and all of a sudden realizing everything is humming on all cylinders, and I'm kind of bored. And so I realized for myself, I'm one of those individuals who kind of thrives a little bit in the chaos. And so, that's where I started exploring opportunities here in Silicon Valley, where I'm located now, because Aspect Software, the last large transaction we had done was in the Silicon Valley area. So I was getting exposure on a every other week basis, traveling out from the Boston area to here. And I wouldn't say I was necessarily looking to fill a particular hole. It was more of I was looking to find that next progressive step. And I certainly was looking in the Boston area, but I just wasn't finding a company that would take me to that next step versus I found that when I was offered the opportunity at Accuray Technology, which is a medical device company of all things out here in Silicon Valley. But the interesting thing about their technology was the way they utilized robots to treat tumors and cancer patients. Such a large software element that kind of in the 2008 timeframe, they had to abide by software revenue recognition, which was something I had spent my entire career in, which was where the company had reached out to me to solicit me to join as their SVP of finance, overseeing everything. The company had gone public the year before, and unfortunately had a couple of material weaknesses in their first 10Q. So it was a role that certainly had board interest in terms of wanting to remediate those material weaknesses, understandably. And for me, also getting back into the public company arena was important, given that Aspect had started public, but with the merger had kind of gone to a private company. So those were the things that excited me about the role at Accuray in terms of being able to come in and immediately make a positive impact on the business by striving to remediate those material weaknesses, which we did in my first year. But then also getting back into the public company environment, which again I think for where I saw my career going, I knew was important for me.
And these are the roles again. 13 years at Aspect, Andersen. You're moving into a much more senior role. You're sort of knocking on the CFO door almost. You're probably more involved with boards than you ever were. I mean, what is your resume? What is it that you're looking to sort of demonstrate to yourself as well as others?
Yeah, I think for Accuray, it was getting, kind of re-oiling that public company compliance wheel. And I certainly did that. I was actively involved in all aspects of the earnings call, of SEC prep, etc. And so then once I wrapped up my tenure at Accuray, I was really looking for a company where I could drive the IPO. And I was fortunate enough to find that at ForeScout Technologies. I joined there in November of 2013. And again, I was the VP of finance, so the right hand to the CFO, but again, responsible for all aspects of accounting and finance, which I truly enjoyed. And the interesting thing about joining ForeScout was they were pretty early in their growth. They were, kind of mid-30s of revenue at that point in time, but had a aspiration of becoming a public company. And what I learned was, they were having challenges getting the audits done, and so coming in and putting in place operational excellence is something that I had done multiple times, and so that's where, and given my public company experience at both Aspect and Accuray, was where it was kind of the perfect fit for me to join ForeScout to get basically everything in order so that the company could ultimately become a successful public company.
And here's a good question then. You're someone who's resided in these companies, these fast growth companies for some time. You're building the financial infrastructure while preserving innovation and agility. How do you do both?
Yeah, no, it's a challenge. The analogy I use, because I dabbled in surfing back in my younger years, the analogy I use for people is trying to stay just ahead of the wave. You don't want to get so far ahead of it that we are stifling the innovation and putting so many processes and procedures in place that it's overly burdensome to the company. But on the same token, you have to put enough in place so that you're just not getting pummeled by the waves. And it's a delicate balance. And I would argue, kind of each company is a little bit different. When I joined ForeScout, what I quickly assessed in my first week was there were 4 employees on my team, but 20-ish contractors, because we were just trying to throw bodies at the problem. And so it was an interesting conversation a couple weeks in where I had to sit down with the CEO and CFO and say, you're going to think I'm crazy, but we need to slow down in order to speed up. And what I meant by that was I knew I needed to hire my direct reports for them to hire the team underneath them for us to have a shooting chance to get kind of processes more stabilized, systems built out, etc. Contractors were just tripping over each other, and we needed that middle level of management just to help kind of put things in place and build out the teams. Conversely, I look at Horizon3.ai that I've joined, and I think for here, similar, we've got a really lean team. I am uber impressed at the amount of work the team has been able to get through. But I also look at it in terms of my focus here is scale. Horizon3.ai is growing at an insane pace. We announced in our Series D press release that we put out in the June-July timeframe that we're growing at over 100%. That kind of growth, the analogy I give to family members who don't understand what I do is I say, try changing, a flat tire going 80 miles an hour down the highway. It's hard to hang out the window, kind of loosening those nuts. So that's a little bit of, we've got to just put better ability to scale, and scale can't be as revenue's ramping up and to the right, our headcount is ramping up and to the right at that same pitch. So I think any CFO that's joining a new organization, it's super important in those first 30 days. You have to glean from that particular environment. What is that critical balance element and area of focus that you need to start to attack first?
So let's step off the sort of the CFO path discussion. Actually, we'll have a few more career related questions regarding that, but maybe a little later. We want to find out, okay, Horizon3.ai, your latest opportunity. Again, you joined them only a few months. I think we caught you in that first 100 days of being a CFO. We'd like to know a little bit about that mindset as well. But right now, tell us about Horizon3.ai. What is this opportunity? What is the company about and its offerings about?
So Horizon3.ai started out as what I would call a technology alternative to pen testing. So for listeners who aren't familiar, pen testing, you think of it as almost a security audit. So most companies do it usually on an annual basis to understand how is my security environment in terms of ensuring a bad actor cannot come in and penetrate the environment. And generally speaking, pen tests are, an audit, they are human driven. So, your pen test is as good as the person who's sitting across from you at the table, and generally happens, like I said, once a year. And so our CEO, Snehal Antani, had the foresight to say, look, because he came up through the technology ranks, wouldn't it be great if you could understand where you stand on a more frequent basis, and rather than relying on a human, the capabilities of the human auditor, make that more technology driven, so that you're not the dependency of the success of your audit is not dependent upon a human being. And so fast forward to where we are today, and the way I describe Horizon3.ai is, we kind of have, what we're really focused on now is, yes, you get the depth of a pen test, but you're really getting the breadth of vulnerability scanning. And what I mean by that is, just because you have an exposure that's identified, well, how do you know if that exposure could amount to something dangerous? If that exposure just leads to a dead end, well, maybe that's not important to fix right now. And one of the biggest barriers facing security teams today within companies is just the amount of noise. At Exabeam, my prior company, I was responsible for overseeing IT and security within the company as well. And that was a conversation the CISO and I regularly had, that there's only so many hours in the day. How do you cull through the false positives, the noise, to be able to know this is what I need to go focus on? And that's what excites me about Horizon3.ai. We're leveraging technology. And so the way our tool works, we've run tens of thousands, over 100,000 pen tests. So we collect all of that information and are continually refining and improving our protocols so that we can come into a company, they run our scan. Our technology is, generally speaking, up and running within minutes, not hours or weeks or months, and can see right away, hey, here's in a nice sand diagram, here's all of the exposures we've identified. Here's, here's the threat actors maybe some of these are associated with. So depending on what vertical industry you're in, you might have some sensitivity to some of those. But then I'd argue, more importantly, here are the ones that you should prioritize fixing and why. Here's the compromised data they could ultimately get to that could really be harmful for your organization. Then our technology is intuitive enough and adds the value to say, what do you want to go fix? It will integrate with your Jira or whatever service ticketing platform you're using, create the ticket, then show you here's what you need to go do to implement the fix, help you fix it, you rerun, and then you can see with confidence, boom, my vulnerability is now fixed. So, even as a CFO, I want to know we're not exposed. And so to be able to real time see that and know that you are remediated, and then to be able to run scans as frequently as, a customer chooses to, that is a huge value add to, we use it internally within Horizon3.ai, but it's also why we have now over 4,000 customers who are using our technology as well.
Well, I have to say your timing is interesting here. It was only a few months, I guess, before you arrived that Horizon3.ai had raised, I have $100 million as a Series D. And this is at a time when the markets have been far more selective, let's say. What about this moment made it the right time for you, though?
Well, it's again, I go back to being strategic. I mentioned it earlier in my first career move from Arthur Andersen to Aspect Software. I, did the same thing here. There were two individuals. I saw somebody post on on LinkedIn, who I worked with in the past, that she had joined Horizon3.ai, and it was someone who I highly respected and really enjoyed working with. I saw the value she brought to organizations, and so I happened to go to their leadership page and see another individual who I worked with in my past at the company, who again highly respected. He's our CRO, and so as a potential CFO, that CRO-CFO relationship is so important. I need to know that I can trust that CRO implicitly, who's sitting across the table from me, because there's such a tight partnership. And so I reached out to them. I texted them and said, hey, congratulations that you're working together again. I see that you have a VP of finance, but if anything ever evolves with the company, would love to chat, because I'd love to work with you again. I'd obviously done enough diligence on the company before I shot that text across the bow to say this definitely it intrigued me, where it struck me that the company had not just a solid product, but man, it had market fit, because it's hard to grow over 100% year over year and do that multiple years without having product market fit. And little did I know when I sent that text that the day before their VP of finance had resigned. And so they were, because they had raised that series, or were in the process of raising the Series D, Jack, that you just alluded to, they were up-leveling the role to bring on their first CFO. Yeah. Kind of the rest is history, because here I am, and I could not be happier in terms of joining
just understanding that hyper growth. And I think they've been reporting, some financial discipline with Rule of 40 profitability, and your role in sustaining that, stepping into this, that seems pretty challenging. How are you going to structure this finance function?
Yeah, no, great question, Jack. Certainly, again, I like to lead teams by really, I view employees as a company's number one asset. So first day I start, I always set up a one-on-one or I should say a team meeting with the entire team. So certainly, did that here at Horizon3.ai, because as I say to the team, look, I was just kind of dropped in over you. This is for you to get to know me. And I try to glean a little bit from each of them, but then within that first, I strive to do it as quickly as possible, depending on the size of the organization. Here at Horizon3.ai with 3 direct reports, I was able to do it in the first week, set up one-on-ones so that I get to know the individual a little bit deeper. Both, I view getting to know them on a personal level as well as a professional level equally important, so that I can understand, how they work as an individual. And getting through that exercise here at Horizon3.ai, I kind of quickly assessed some single-threadedness we had with individuals, not surprisingly, with a team of 3 individuals. And I candidly said to the individuals, I said, we've kind of put you in an unfair position, and the company. And here's what I think we need to do. I think we need to create some bandwidth for you, because, you can deliver more to the organization. I can see that in my first, 10, 15 minutes of a conversation. But to have an environment where an individual, can't take a break without coming back to that mountain of work, that's hard for the individual. And so, we're building out the team to create some bandwidth, because as I spoke to earlier, one of the biggest priorities I have for Horizon3.ai is we need to build scale into the operations. I can't single-handedly drive all of that. I need my team to be at my side doing that. So creating some bandwidth for them to partake in those conversations was one of my first steps. And then also concurrently, I'm working to build out our FP&A organization, because my view is sharing data with my peers. I don't want my peers to be mini CFOs, but they know how to run their respective functions better than I do. But I want them to, my job and my attitude is I provide them the guardrails to navigate within, but having a strong FP&A function enables us to build out what those guardrails are and give them that real-time visibility, which, that's something that we are evolving to as an organization.
Investors clearly see AI as a market shaping force as reflected by Horizon3.ai's recent raise. How does that external enthusiasm, which we talked a little bit about that back during the dot-com era, a lot of enthusiasm. How does that external enthusiasm influence how you view the CFO role?
Yeah, I think, but I'm looking up a little. It's an excellent question, Jack. I think it's a balanced approach, and I say that because you see kind of, AI is just everywhere, and it's there's times where kind of, if you feel like just people are riding the trend wave, and I look at it in terms of how can we use it to prudently run the business, and that's even in our product. We don't use, we leverage AI, but our tool is not kind of 100% AI driven, because you also don't, you don't want to have some of those costs can just be a, runaway train. So we're using it very pragmatically in our product. And I want to do the same thing within our operations. I will say we have different tools that leverage it, that, I'm finding very insightful. There's a number of new waves of even just finance-oriented platforms that are leveraging AI better, that, as I say to my team, we will evaluate those technologies not to replace people, but to help you contribute better to the company. It's kind of like our tool. If our tool can help a security team identify, these are the 10 mega critical fixes I need to make out of the hundreds of fixes that our solution identified, that prioritization effort is so important to our customers. I want to do the same thing for our operations, where let's leverage technology where we can reduce the noise so that our team and our employees can then contribute more to the, kind of do more of the strategic fun stuff versus just kind of be mired in the day-to-day volumes of work.
Looking ahead, I want to just touch on financial storytelling with you. Looking ahead, and again, you've helped craft the stories of these companies that have grown so quickly over time, helping people open their minds to potential and opportunity. Looking ahead, what excites you about helping to shape the financial story of an AI-driven company? What is it?
Yeah, when I look at Horizon3.ai, I personally think that the product is just so valuable to our customers. So certainly a CFO, is going to be the financial expert. But I also view the CFO as, they can be an evangelist for the company as well. And so, I look forward to, kind of being at various events, as we continue to grow. We're getting a little bit more notoriety over these last several months, coming off of the heels of the Series D. We recently won the Inc. 5000. We were on the list, but we also won fastest growing cybersecurity company, in their results. And so, kind of building upon that and being able to explain, here's the value that our 4,000 plus users of Horizon3.ai technology see, and here's how that translates into our financial results, just gets me, it gets me giddy just thinking about kind of how that future narrative starts to shape.
Well, thank you for that. We are up to what we like to refer to as our finance strategic moment question. We're looking for a moment of insight that you experienced sometime in your career. I know I prep our guests ahead of time about this, so I can just ask you, share with us a finance strategic moment.
Yeah, I can think of a few, Jack. I mean, I think even just as recently as Horizon3.ai, just even in the short, I'm looking at the calendar, less than 2 months I've been here, there's, I think, especially for a company that is experiencing such high growth as we are, when I came on board, I started to look, and generally speaking, the company had been looking at data on a quarterly basis. Kind of what are different ratios, kind of byproducts on a quarterly basis, which I think is important. But this we just wrapped up our quarter end because we're January 31st year end, and did our first board presentation, and I started looking at some of the data and said, maybe it makes sense to also look at it on a trailing 12 months, because I think it's important to look at both, because you can see trailing 12 months is going to be a longer time period and maybe give you a little bit more insight in terms of kind of trends, versus I view quarterly data sometimes as giving you insight on, is this something you need to keep your eye on? And I'm specifically, where this came up recently for me was on some data retention, customer data retention, customer dollar retention, ratios that we do, and looking at those and saying, does data either positively or negatively, don't get, does what we're looking at on a quarter get us either overly excited or overly cautious? But then how does that, when you overlay that with looking at trailing 12 months, what does that look like? So, that's certainly something that, just very early on, I'm looking at Horizon3.ai with. And then I mentioned this earlier with ForeScout, and I think I can see it a little bit even at Horizon3.ai of saying sometimes you do have to slow down to speed up. And what I mean by that is building out the team, building out system integration, building out data definitions. If I ask 3 different people, kind of what are you seeing for this number, and I get 3 different answers, that's a red flag for me. And so getting an organization to strategically slow down a little bit so that you can build out that solid foundation to then allow the organization to run as fast as you can to keep up with the pace of the organization as it grows on a scalable basis. Kind of keeping up with the pace just by throwing more employees at it is not, in my view, a recipe for success. Those are 2 of the strategic areas that, I think I look at in my career where I've inserted both of those, and I see how they provided value to the organizations that I was with during those times.
Nice. Thank you for that. We're going to move to our mentoring round, where I want to ask you, I'm going to share something with you and ask you if you think my thinking is correct on this. But you move into industry in a very pragmatic way. You don't go to the .com bait out there. You move forward into more responsibility roles, and you come to the West Coast. And yes, you get to tech. You were in medical devices for a while. But again, it's always about more responsibility, obviously headed towards leadership roles. But we can see these technology waves, and your leadership sort of arc are aligned well. How am I doing? Do you look at your career this way, or is it a little messier, Jack?
No, I think you're spot on. I mean, look, I think there's some level of being strategic, but then there's some just luck, right? I mean, never, again, like I said earlier, if you had told me Aspect Software would grow from 100 million to 600 million in the time frame that I was there, I would have said you're crazy, but it did. And even at ForeScout, I remember being on the floor of NASDAQ when we were being listed that day. I remember standing next to a board member and chatting a little bit, and her saying to me, I hope you're appreciating this moment, because, for every company that wants to be standing on this floor experiencing this IPO, there are hundreds that fail. And so, I am very meticulous when I am researching a company to decide if I want to join. It needs to have multiple. It needs to have product. It needs to have kind of a market fit. It needs to have growth. And it needs to have the right people, because that is something that I think is so critical to a company's success. And if I look back at my career, and I certainly did this, as I contemplated my most recent move, and I couldn't be happier for joining Horizon3.ai. And part of that was when I looked back and seeing strong leaders who can cut out the noise, who can kind of, dilute the egos around the table, or, kind of validate for make it comfortable for everybody around the table. No, your opinion matters, and, we're gonna kind of cut through the noise and just make decisions and then own those decisions. Working with an individual like that, kind of at my prior company, man, for me, it resonated with the right leader, how much of an intangible asset that is for a company in terms of how much more work you can get through and have fun doing it. And I remember, meeting with Snehal again, who's Horizon3.ai CEO, and there were so many characteristics that reminded me of the prior CEO I worked with, that, my gut was telling me that this is going to be a group of, we jokingly laugh at my house of, my people, of kind of just down to earth people who, we roll up our sleeves. We're still, while we're growing very quickly, we're still, I'd categorize us as a small to mid-sized company. And so, as executive leaders, you have to be, coach kind of, calling the plays, but, then you're also a player on the field, kind of rolling up your sleeves, getting dirty. And, there are individuals who can kind of pivot from that, I like to call it 50,000 foot strategic view, to, 5 feet, and you're kind of pulling the weeds out of the garden. And there's some individuals who can't. And I think we're very fortunate at the company that I've joined that, we've got individuals, leaders who can kind of pivot back and forth. And I also think it's leaders who are just good human beings. Like I said earlier, and this is, I think, something that, I've mentored plenty of people through my career, and I've benefited from having strong mentors. And it's what makes somebody a successful mentor is you see the whole person. You don't just see the professional. You see, the individual, and kind of, you can reconcile the two of, what's important for all aspects of your life, because people, that value proposition needs to be balanced. The saying that someone told me probably 15 years or so ago in my career that has stuck with me today, and I use quite often, is, you have to find balance, and you have to understand on a daily basis, what are rubber balls and what are glass balls? And what I mean by that is, rubber balls you can drop and they'll bounce. Glass balls will break. And as I say to my team, look, there's days where, if our daughter wakes up sick in the middle of the night, that Monday morning, she's my glass ball. I can't drop her. And I openly acknowledge that with my team. I just say, look, my daughter's home sick. I will do the best I can, but she's my priority today. But then when we were selling Exabeam, she bounced a lot. She was definitely a rubber ball, because there were a lot of important deadlines that had to be met. And I think from my experience, people just appreciate that authenticity. For me to say, work is going to take a back seat today because my kid comes first. Because they know when the roles are reversed, I absolutely would be supportive of that for them as well.
Nice. Thank you for that. Hey, we always like to ask our guests to reflect a little on the personal side with us. You're rather new there, so there might be many things your new colleagues don't know about you. Anything from your past, an interest, an event you attended that was unusual, anything that you could share with us that sets you apart a little?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it's funny. I'm so transparent, and I kind of joke. I call myself, honest to a fault and an open book, because that's just kind of how I roll. I think they probably would get a chuckle on a personal level. My family calls me, basically says I have a jukebox mentality on life, because I will just randomly kind of, sing to our daughter things I want to do, that I try to get her motivated to do. But, I think there are causes that are important to me. I'm very proud to say that I'm a 10-year rider in something called the Pan Mass Challenge, which I got involved with when I still lived in Massachusetts. It's a 2-day bike ride that is the most successful charity, one of the most successful charity fundraisers in the United States. Our goal this year is raising $76 million that goes to funding the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston. And unfortunately, cancer is something that has personally touched my family, and so it's a cause that I'm passionate about, and I think I'm approaching almost $150,000 that I've personally raised through generosity of people who sponsor me over my 10 years. So that's certainly something I'm very proud of, because I think again, I look back and say while I've had have had and hope to continue to have a successful career, I look and say, how can we all make the world a better place? And certainly, that's something that is important to me, to allow my team members and employees of the companies I work with to make sure that we're allocating that time for them to give back to the community, because at the end of the day, that's how we're really going to make our mark. And so those are a couple of things that I can think of, Jack.
Well, thank you. We're up to our final question. At least we're up to the top of the hour almost, so I better ask the final question. We'd like you to look forward at the end of our discussions, and we're wondering your top of mind priorities. And I know as a new CFO, oh my gosh, you got lists of lists, but we're wondering, what are the things you got to get done over the next 12 months?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's certainly something I just spoke to our board about. So priority number one is I've got to get my team hired. And I'm actively underway on that right now. And then kind of second and third, tied are kind of our system blueprint or system architecture. How do we get, our CRM talking to our ERP, talking to kind of how do we get all of those systems talking to each other in a more integrated fashion? And that is really tied in closely with data. Kind of what are the different data elements that are important for us to be tracking to be effectively managing the business? Do we have those defined? What is the system of record? Who owns that calculation? Because that's where you really have to have that defined in order to know what is the priority order of how I'm going to integrate my systems. Because I've seen it where you'll have your system of record downstream feed some information, but if you haven't gone through this exercise efficiently, I've inherited things where all of a sudden that downstream system is feeding information back up to your system of record. So it's hard to have accurate data when you've got kind of this kind of full circle loop. So, that's certainly an area of focus for me, because the more data we can use to assess the business now, the better it's going to make us kind of 1, 2, 3 years down the road.
Holly Gray, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Jack, appreciate you having me. It's been great to be here. Thank you.